All right, Darcy Smith. I have Darcy Smith here. We met at the last Green Lab for Ryan Hutton, and I did a quick little interview of you, Darcy, there, but I appreciate you agreeing to this second interview here so we get a little better video and audio going. So, just to catch up our viewers here, can you just give us your background as a toxicologist and your involvement with
Recording in
Canada?
progress.
Certainly. Um, Retired several years ago after over 30 years with the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, up here in Canada. I was a toxicologist, drug and alcohol. I was a toxicology section manager, and the last 5 years I was in the forensic lab system. I was a general manager of a forensic laboratory. So, a fair amount of experience that way. Um, I left the forensic laboratory system due to a deficit reduction action plan that occurred under one of our federal governments. They downsized from 6 labs to 3 crime labs for our country. And at that time, I went over and then worked with National Traffic Services full time, working strictly with the Drug Recognition Expert Program as a
Okay.
special advisor.
Perfect. So, whenever we were at the Green Lab, we were talking about how Canada has a specific set number of impairment when it comes to intoxication. Can you go ahead and give us the what the current rules and regulations are in Canada for impairment and driving with cannabis?
Certainly. One thing your listeners have to recognize is the difference between Canadian and US legal systems. In Canada, we have one criminal code for impaired driving, so it's the same from across the country, all 10 provinces and 3 territories, the exact same impaired driving law, which also means the exact same Supreme Court rulings apply across our country. With our criminal code, we have an offense of just impaired driving. Okay, so
Okay.
just impaired driving doesn't matter what you're impaired by. If you're deemed to be impaired, you can be convicted of that. We also then have some other laws within it dealing with alcohol, so similar to your point zero eight law for a blood alcohol level. And then we have some per se laws for certain drugs in Canada, where for cannabis we have 2 levels, 2 nanograms per mil in blood or 5 nanograms per mil in blood, the difference between a summary and an indictable offense. And then we also have a third one relating to cannabis, which is 2.5 nanograms per mil of cannabis in your blood, plus 50 milligram percent or greater of alcohol, or as you'd refer to it, 0.05 or greater of alcohol. So we actually have 3 levels related to cannabis, as well as just being impaired if we didn't take a blood sample and we just work from a urine sample and DRE evaluation. We also have per se laws relating to LSD, ketamine, psilocybin, GHB, 6 monoacetyl morphine, and a couple of others in there, which are basically zero tolerance.
Okay.
So that if we found any detectable level in your blood, you'd be found guilty of the offense.
Okay, so let's go back to the cannabis part with those numbers. What was your role in helping create those numbers for Canada?
Well, at the time we were looking at Canada was looking at legalizing marijuana and then looking at the whole impaired driving aspect. I was part of the Drugs and Driving Committee of the Canadian Society of Forensic Science, which is an advisory body that provided opinion and research to the Department of Justice, so the Attorney General, Solicitor General would be better informed in making their laws. At the time, back in 2018, 2016, 2017, when they were looking to legalize, which occurred in 2018, the Department of Justice approached the Drugs and Driving Committee and asked, we need something to deal with making the public comfortable with this idea of legalizing marijuana, because we know people will use it and drive, especially once it becomes legalized. The challenge is when you deal with numbers and you're dealing with cannabis or THC specifically, which is what we measure for cannabis in the blood, is that there's not a good relationship between the numbers that you'll find in the blood and actual impairment. It's going to depend upon a person's usage, the dosage, the strength of the product that they're using. All of these factors combine into it. So our basic recommendation, or certainly my recommendation, and again, I want to be clear, the opinions I'm giving are mine personally. They in no way reflect the position, policy, or opinion of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, of the current Drugs and Driving Committee, or even the Drugs and Driving Committee, other members on that committee when I was part of it. Or I'm also a member of the technical advisory panel of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and my opinion does not reflect any policies or opinions of that organization either. So we came back to justice, and basically I said, it doesn't make sense to have a number, right? What you want is an impairment. You want strong impairment. You want to train people to be able to detect impairment. And when you have that, then it doesn't matter what the number is, because a naive user can be impaired at a level of 2 or 1.5 nanograms per mil, and a very tolerant user might be at 8 or 9 or 10, and you're not going to see much impairment with them. So it really comes down to, it's more important to detect impairment in their driving abilities than it is to worry about a number. Unfortunately, governments being what they are, they have their own agendas and their own way of dealing with policy issues and procedures. They really wanted a value that the public would be able to relate to, as they do with the 0.08 laws,
Sure.
right? Everyone's familiar with that. So they wanted a model that was similar to the alcohol model. Our best advice to the government at the time was, okay, here's a list of numbers. Here's a list of the pros and cons of using those numbers. You decide. And so that's basically what happened. The government went ahead, took all of the research we gave them, took all of the opinion we gave them, and they came out with the numbers that were set there. So our involvement was informing the government of the pros and cons of doing it each way. And the
Sure.
government does what government does.
Sure. So when did these laws go into effect?
In July of 2018, we legalized cannabis from a recreational aspect, and we'd already had medicinal cannabis laws on the books. So
So since that those laws went into effect, what are they seeing now with maybe incarceration rates or the socio-economical, where the middle to lower class, are they affected by constantly being punished for these crimes that may be inaccurate necessarily with the numbers?
I can't really say we've seen much of that in Canada yet. I'm not saying it might not happen in the future as we do things, but realistically, it has not become a major problem for us with driving. Uh, Discussing it with some of my colleagues in the enforcement field, it's more like the people that were driving under the influence of cannabis before it became legal are the same people who are driving under the influence of cannabis now that it is legal. So
Yeah.
we haven't really seen that jump in increase. Like, I know I look at some of the research that's come from certain states like Washington and that, and they're talking about these massive increases in the amount of cannabis. And part of the challenge when you're looking at the literature where they're trying to compare pre-legalization incarceration rates, or usage rates more so than incarceration rates, and post-legalization, is that there wasn't a lot of good data on the pre-legalization. It was just what we had there, and now all of a sudden, once we legalize the drug, all of a sudden we're much more attuned to it. We're training more people to specifically look for it. So of course we're going to see more of it, but part of the percentage increases that we see are just that we didn't know were there. It was an unknown to us at that time.
Sure. So back to our first encounter at Ryan Hutton's Green Lab. What are your opinions on what he's doing, and why? Tell me about what you guys learned from it. Anything that you would possibly do different? Are you guys planning on trying to do something similar? All of those questions.
Yeah, we had actually started looking at the concept of green labs when the government first started talking about legalization for recreational use. Like I said, I've been involved with the drug recognition expert program since 2003 when it went national in Canada. We had it in Canada since 1995, but only in British Columbia. 2003, we took it national, and that's when I got involved with it. So we've recognized the aspect that if we're going to legalize a drug, we really need to be more able to look for the impairment that we would expect to see from it and better train our officers. One thing I really liked about Ryan's lab is the 2 dosing sessions. The first dosing session where they're just doing some of it, just taking a few hits and that, and then coming out. and then the second dosing session where it's like, okay, get blitzed,
Yeah,
so to
right.
speak.
Yeah.
And what that does is that's very effective in demonstrating to the officers that just because someone has used some cannabis doesn't mean they're going to be impaired.
Sure.
And that's, I think, was a surprise to some of the officers who were at that session. Well, they smoked it, I can smell it on them, but I'm not seeing any impairment. What's going on? And then you see the difference where dose makes the problem with driving on that aspect. So we were looking at it. We'd run into Ryan at numerous conferences before, and we knew he was doing a lot of work with the Green Labs. We'd seen some of the presentations, and so we had the opportunity to come down this time just to see physically how they were putting it together. Again, due to the way laws are between your country and our country, U.S. and Canada, there's differences in what we can or can't do and how we would have to be able to approach it. So it was nice seeing firsthand how Ryan did it, and then the involvement of the local cannabis industry in assisting him with putting that on. That's a win-win for both sides. It's a win for the industry and the consumers of the product, and it's a win for the enforcement officers as well. And I think it's very important that those two sides get together when we're doing these type of things and understand the issues that affect all of us.
Most definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. And, I've been doing it with Ryan for a couple of years now. And what you just said about, the officers seeing the difference between consumption and impairment, it happens in every single one of them. You always have those handful of officers that, especially in a place like Missouri where there's all these rural areas where, there's still a lot of that stigma that's out there that as soon as you take any kind of cannabis, you're completely impaired. So it's been amazing for me to be doing this with Ryan and see those both sides come together. And so, yeah, I really hope you guys, get the opportunity to create something similar. Do you, to go a little bit off subject, but so do you know any other countries that are dealing with this similar issue that you guys with as far as like setting a certain number for impairment with cannabis when it comes to driving?
Yeah, a lot of the European countries and that, whether they're legalizing or not, have set the numbers to stone. And numbers are just something governments like because they're very easy to deal with. You're either above it or you're below it. We don't have to worry about anything. Part of the challenge with that is if you look at the research that's been done, it's not black and white as we've discussed, and we're not even sure people are picking the right numbers. You look at some of the studies that have been done or some of the papers that have come out in the last 5 or 6 years, the 237 cannabis study, they found the reasons for stopping individuals were almost equally split, whether the people were under 5 nanograms per mil or they were over 5 nanograms per mil. I think the only one they really saw a difference was in speeding as the reason for stop. And strangely enough, there were more speeders who were under 5 nanograms per mil than over.
Yeah, right.
So,
Of
so
course.
it's these type of things. I think the one where the 5 nanogram per mil level was the greater than 5 nanogram per mil reason for stopping was in lane weaving. So, a bit more vehicle control issue. But other than that, it was pretty much evenly split as to why these people were stopped. If we look at the Iowa simulator study, what is it? In their specific study, limited number of subjects, limited number of parameters they're looking at, but they found the impairment equal to 0.08. Alcohol was about 13 nanograms per mil. Now that's really just dealing with standard deviation of lane position as a measure. So there's other factors that could be considered in there. But so you have these aspects where all this emphasis on number seems to be misplaced. But the problem is it's easier than trying to determine impairment. As you've been involved with Ryan's workshop, so you've seen the type of process the DREs go through and trying to determine impairment. You can see the challenge that they can face, especially when someone's maybe not blitzed, but just feeling good. And quite frankly, stepping away from just cannabis, but people with medication, some people are going to be better when they're medicated, better drivers when they're medicated than if they weren't on their medicine. So where do you draw that line? And like some countries like England, Sweden, or that where they have very strict per se limits for many drugs, it becomes very difficult. And I'm not sure it's the best way to approach the issue.
Sure, and I totally agree with you on that. Um, as far as back to what Ryan's doing with the Green Labs, and all this data he's collecting, where we're not only collecting the results from the police officers in their field sobriety test, but we're also collecting the saliva samples to know where their THC level is at. And would there be any other suggestions from a toxicologist's perspective of things that he can add to it, or other data collection that he could be doing to help this push this campaign initiative forward?
Well, the one thing I would suggest that is strictly from a toxicologist position is that the saliva samples are nice, but they don't really tell you that much. He'd be much better off if he wants to compare data about impairment and levels in the body to actually draw blood samples and have those analyzed, because that's what is truly relevant, because it's the blood that's going to circulate, get to the brain, interact with the CB1 receptors, and that which cause the impairment. So the saliva is a nice aspect, but saliva is really only telling you the recency of use on that aspect. So that would, as like I say, strictly from a toxicology standpoint, it would be, if I'm going to do that data collection, I'm collecting blood, not saliva.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll mention that to him as well. So I appreciate that. Are there any other groups out there that are doing drug recognition efforts with cannabis that, like Ryan's doing? Are there any other groups out there worldwide that are doing something similar?
There's a number of the states. Colorado, there's I can't remember his name, a gentleman there who does Green Labs with the Colorado's the people up there, and does some touring around it and that. Across the world, there's not that much. We're trying to get some more research done in Canada. Right now, Dr. Doug Burness and myself recently just published a paper on looking at uh, doing adding tests to these standardized field sobriety tests to better detect cannabis impairment specifically, so that we'd have something more useful for the officers at roadside. And we need to do more work on that, but that's out there. And a, a lot of the challenge is there's still regulatory hoops you have to jump through to be able to do cannabis research. It's even once we legalized it in Canada, um, the 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 uh, the agency that's responsible for allowing you to do the research didn't know how to classify it, didn't know how to look at it, and because they'd never thought about it before. It's like, well, it's sort of a clinical study. Well, it's not a clinical study because we're not worried about concerned with the disease and the population, all of this, and they had a real hard time trying to go through the steps of approving research to be done for that. And across the world, like I say, there's not a lot of the countries where cannabis is actually legal, where there seems to be a large amount of research going into its effects, especially around impairment and driving. So hopefully that's going to change. But with all these things, it takes time to change the mentality of the people in power.
Sure. And that was going to be my next question, is how do we make that change? And you kind of already answered it there. I mean, that's really the only way that I see, right? I mean, is
Yeah, you keep knocking at the door and you keep putting the things forward. And as elections come and go, you like to think things change, but again, the difference between the two or three or four political parties once they get into power is not all that much.
sure.
So
Yeah.
you still have the same thing, and then you have the agencies which are apolitical but have their own bureaucratic inertia that you have to overcome when you deal with new things. So
Sure. Well, hopefully, doing things like this, getting these videos and covering, people like Ryan Hutton and people like yourself that kind of see the bigger picture and are educated enough their opinion does matter. So hopefully, we can get more of these types of videos and information out there to the general public through our publication, through other things online as well. So, last question: would there be any other person that you would recommend interviewing for this particular conversation?
boy, I don't know if you've ever talked to Marilyn Hustis,
I
who
haven't.
is sort of the godmother of cannabis research, certainly in the States, probably worldwide.
Okay.
Now, a lot of Maryland stuff is the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So, how the body deals with it and how it deals with the body, and not so much specific impaired driving research, but she's certainly been involved in a number of publications and that deal with that as well.
Okay.
But yeah, Maryland would be, if you want to talk to someone who's got the name recognition within the
Sure.
scientific community to deal with cannabis, Maryland would be your person
Oh,
to
I
go to.
appreciate that. Yeah, and if you happen to think of anybody else after we get off here, like, I'm always looking for suggestions. If you ever want to text
Certainly.
me or anything,
Yep.
and then maybe down the road, we'd love to, if you'd like to, have you come back on. Maybe we could bring some other people and have more of an in-depth conversation about this. Maybe some people from Ryan's lab, or maybe some other cannabis sponsors that we can hopefully bring in to help continue to push this campaign forward to market what Ryan's doing. But I'd love to continue the
Yeah.
conversation with you. I really enjoyed everything you've had to say, and hopefully we can do this again with some more people and keep the conversation going.
Sounds good to me, Clayton.
All right, thanks, Darcy. Have a great day. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, bye.